Welcome to today's episode of our podcast, where we dive deep into the fascinating world of West African religions with our title, Beyond Fetishism, Rethinking West African Religion. I'm your host, and today we have a real treat for you. We'll unravel historical misconceptions and challenge outdated definitions that have long plagued the understanding of African spirituality. But before we get into that, let me bring our guest into the conversation.
That's right. It's great to be here. Today we're really digging into the work of mid-20th century scholar Geoffrey Parrinder, whose book West African Religion questioned the superficial labels that have been slapped onto diverse African faiths, particularly the term fetishism.
Exactly. And it's essential to understand, if we go back in history, European writers often described African religions using terms like primitive, savage, and fetishism. So right off the bat, we see a critical misunderstanding that doesn't just misinterpret these beliefs, it distorts them entirely. Parrinder was one of the first to push back against these ingrained stereotypes.
So let's unpack that a bit. The concept of primitive religion, for instance, which Parrinder critiques, suggests that there's a hierarchy of faith, right? Europe at the top and various non-European cultures classified as low on the ladder of belief systems.
Yes, Parrinder argues that this categorization is not just simplistic, it's entirely misleading. He points out that lumping together diverse groups of West Africans under categories like primitive ignores their rich and varied histories. Drawing from sociologist Emile Durkheim, Parrinder illustrates that earlier anthropologists disregarded local contexts, leading to generalized, careless labeling.
And that means, effectively, that a religious practice from one culture could be viewed through a tainted lens that strips it of its unique identity. So what does Parrinder suggest instead? How does he invite us to rethink West African religions?
Parrinder encourages us to see these practices as complex systems. For instance, he emphasizes that aspects like magic or spiritual charms in West African religions are not signs of backwardness. They are part of a sophisticated belief structure deeply rooted in respect for life and nature. He draws parallels to more widely accepted religions, underscoring that just because a practice is different does not make it less valid.
This is a key point, and it reminds me of another term that has been misused: fetishism. The term has been thrown around as a catch-all for any practice that seemed unusual or irreverent from a Eurocentric view. It actually stems from the Portuguese word feitiço, which refers to objects imbued with magical power. However, its evolution in the context of African beliefs has typically carried a pejorative connotation.
And that's where things become really problematic, right? The word fetishism has often been applied indiscriminately to anything that doesn't fit within a narrow Western conception of spirituality. Imagine being described merely as strange, without deeper context. That's the disservice it does to these rich belief systems.
Absolutely. Parrinder critiques how using fetishism simplifies complex intentions behind rituals. For instance, objects like charms or ancestors are sources of immense meaning, representing relationships, culture, and spiritual connections. It overlooks the full religious framework and the deeper belief in spiritual forces associated with these objects.
Speaking of which, let's talk about another concept that shapes these misunderstandings: animism. This term was introduced by Edward Tyler, who saw the belief that spirits inhabit nature as a lower stage of religious evolution compared to monotheism. But Parrinder views this with skepticism, arguing that such an understanding trivializes the depth of African spirituality.
And these discussions contribute to this false idea of a linear evolution of religion, suggesting that beliefs evolve from primitive to advanced. Parrinder challenges this by showing that many West African spiritual systems offer rich, nuanced interactions with the world and the forces at play within it.
It's essential to recognize the responsive and dynamic nature of West African religions. They aren't static, but rather alive and evolving, reflecting the complexities of human experiences and beliefs. And what Parrinder highlights with his work is the need to appreciate this richness without overly simplistic labels.
Exactly. Another fascinating aspect of Parrinder's research is how he discusses the journey from localized religious practices to a broader understanding of divine beings. Initially, many West African religions might have worshipped localized deities, like a sacred tree considered a home for a powerful spirit. Over time, that practice evolves.
Yes, the example of the Iroko tree as a sacred entity respected as a divine force speaks volumes. With time, these beliefs expand. You begin to see a recognition of various elemental gods like mountain gods, river gods, and so forth. It shows an evolving conceptualization of the divine.
That's a prime example of a more comprehensive polytheism. Speaking of which, could you break down what that specifically entails within West African religions?
Certainly, Parrinder outlines a fourfold classification structure within West African religions. First, there's the recognition of a supreme god or creator that is sometimes above other gods, sometimes among equals. This can be seen in gods like Onyame in Twi Ashanti beliefs or Mawu in Iwe tradition.
So there's an overarching divine presence. And then what follows that?
Next comes chief divinities or spirits associated with natural forces. These aren't just abstract entities, they function similarly to gods in ancient Greek or Roman religions. Think about names like Abossum or Orisha, which refer to powerful spirits that interact with the world in meaningful ways.
Fantastic. Then we move into the realm of ancestor veneration, which is critical in many African spiritualities. These are human beings who have passed but continue to influence their communities in spiritual ways, acting as guardians and connections to the divine.
Exactly, yes. Ancestors in this context don't just represent the past, they are active participants in the spiritual framework of the community. And finally, there's a multitude of other spirits that can be benevolent or dangerous, all intricately interwoven into social relationships and community life.
So that layered structure takes us away from viewing these spiritual systems as chaotic or superstitious. There's an order to the beliefs that allows for a richer appreciation of cultures. It's not just about strange rituals, but about human attempts to connect and understand the universe.
Well said. Both Parrinder and his contemporary, Edwin W. Smith, emphasize how understanding West African religions as structured systems of polytheism gives dignity to these belief systems. They're just as intricate as any other historical system we might study, especially when we compare them to polytheistic religions like those of ancient Rome, Greece, and Egypt.
And that recognition provides a fresh context for understanding. It's a way to honor the belief systems without diminishing their sophistication. However, there is still the ongoing conversation about how these traditional beliefs interact with modern religions like Christianity.
Exactly, and it raises interesting questions about religious evolution too. As Christianity spreads, how do individuals merge old beliefs with new practices? Some of Parrinder's questions encourage further discussion. He asks what elements from traditional African beliefs carry over into modern Christian expressions. How do these resilient systems adapt?
And that adaptability is crucial, isn't it? It shows the dynamism within these faith traditions and their capacity to engage with change while holding on to vital parts of cultural identity. It emphasizes that spirituality is not just housing dogmas, but living and breathing relationships with the divine.
What a profound perspective on the conversation. This discussion has illuminated a few essential insights. First, it's clear that terms like fetishism are outdated and inappropriate for framing African spiritual systems. They diminish the rich narratives behind these belief structures.
Right, and we should also remember that West African religions are dynamic, layered, and complex, just as any other religious system. Understanding these nuances encourages us to respect and appreciate the diversity of human experience and belief.
Absolutely. We've covered a lot today. Whether it's the robust categorization of deities or the complex interactions with modern religions, it's vital to engage with these topics through an informed lens that recognizes their depth.
And we invite you, dear listeners, to continue exploring these themes in your own communities or academic settings. By engaging deeply with different religious expressions, we foster a greater sense of global understanding and respect.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of our podcast. Until next time, keep questioning and exploring the rich tapestry of human culture.